Oi, oi, it's your boy Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we had some bonkers fights over the weekend. UFC 261 in particular. Was it 8, 9 knockouts? Or finishes at least, because Brendan Allen scored a... Well, we'll get into what that was, because there was a bit of debate over it, but just finish after finish. Couple of good fights that went to decision. For a card that I wasn't that hyped for, turned out pretty shit hot, to be honest. And I don't think it even falls into the sometimes the cards with no names on have the bit, because there was a lot of names on this one. I just wasn't particularly excited about the matchups themselves. Really good weekend for me as a bettor, because I say that when you're betting on MMA, you get good when you start to lose your money slower. But I only made 4 bets this weekend. I'd put a parlay down on Usman and Valentina because I like to bet on what I expect. If there's an outcome that I think is pretty much assured and I will also probably not get much content out of it, I bet on that. So won those ones. But I bet on Rose because I just had a little feeling that she was going to be difficult for Zhang because of stuff we talked about in the Patreon boy piece. Though didn't expect it to come off, and it didn't come off in anything like the way I thought it would. This is the thing. Anytime you win a bet like that, it's always for exactly the wrong reason. The one I always remember is a lad called Tamura who was in the UFC for a while, and he was fighting some Chinese lad who basically just guillotined people from the bottom. And I'd rolled with Tamura, and I knew that he was like a blanketing lay-in prayer. And then he chooses that fight to score his first knockout ever on the feet. So I won the bet, but I was like, what the fuck was that about? And then the other one I put down was Clay Collard to beat Anthony Pettis. And that was nothing to do with the matchup. That was literally just because Anthony Pettis can't win 3 in a row. He was on a 1-1 sort of losing streak over and over. And then he went up to 2-2. As in, he'd win 2, lose 2, win 2, lose 2. And if he won this one, he'd have been on a 3. So I was like, does the pattern change or does the pattern continue? And then, wouldn't you know it, Clay Collard pulled it off on PFL. The PFL card was bizarre. Lance Palmer lost, and if there's one thing you can do, it's set your watch by Lance Palmer winning, and boringly. But we're not a PFL podcast, and, doubly so because in the UK, you have to buy PFL for like an online pay-per-view price. And I was like, fuck off. I am not giving any money to watch Lance Palmer. But anyway, UFC 261. Usman versus Masvidal. Rematch of their fight. I mean, Usman scored a sensational knockout. Rose pulled off the upset in the co-main event. And then Valentina Shevchenko finished Jessica Andrade. And that was one that, people were waiting for me to eat crow there because it was a match where Valentina was the overwhelming favourite. And we did laugh at people who said that she was in their top 5 entertaining fighters of all time. But she did score the 7th or 8th most interesting finish on this card, So, but we'll get more into Valentina versus Jessica Andrade later. I want to focus first on Usman versus Masvidal. Yeah, I mean, Masvidal, I thought, fought a smarter fight than the first time. I'm not gonna, a lot of people are seeing this as like, damn, dude, you did even worse than the first time. But I think the truth is that Usman just did better. Masvidal, you saw him using low kicks a lot, which we talked about before, because firstly, aside from Dean Thomas being like, look at them skinny legs he's got, he also just has bad knees historically. He's been quite open about that. And the sort of stamping kick and the low kick, kind of the sort of things you can get away with against a wrestler more easily than sort of body kicks, which is a Masvidal specialty, and low kicks to the thigh, which are so easy to snatch up in your hip pocket and just run through on like a single converted to double, whatever that's called. Is it a Bazagar? A Balthazar? No, that's a big bottle. But yeah, good use of low kicks. The weird stamping teep that he did a lot against Stephen Thompson. Standing very tall, shooting his jab, which was something we said last time, didn't really jab a lot. There was a lot of sort of selling out for the finish in the first fight, which is especially weird because he thought that he wasn't going to have cardio, so he sold out for the finish, and he lasted the 5 rounds anyway, which is unexpected. But I thought Usman just looked phenomenal here. And the thing that we were talking about with Rose in the co-main event too, that article on my Patreon, or go to the Fight Primer, click through to it, but it's called Rose Namajunas Long and Short Rhythm, and we talked about the sort of bouncing the lead leg in and out that she does, which is, it's something that I think everyone should be doing in the age of calf kicks anyway, and it should have been doing in the age of low line side kicks and oblique kicks, because the reason that it's so easy to kick people in the lead leg all the time is that they just walk in with it there. It's always on the front of their stance. Whereas if you're showing false entries, you were going, oh, am I coming in? No, I'm not. Then you pull it away. You've got a good chance of getting in on the kick when they kick. If you retract from it. There are a couple here. Actually, getting ahead of myself, but Usman has got a little bit of that Rose sort of stuff in him now, which is interesting because they were all training at that camp together. And I was watching the Jessica Andrade fight, the Jessica Andrade Rose Namajunas fight, and we'll talk about the Jessica Andrade Valentina fight in a bit, I'm sure. But the Andrade Namajunas rematch, Namajunas is using the head block and smashing her forehead into Andrade's face like Justin Gaethje. So they're all training together. They've all got little bits of each other coming in, which is quite cool. But that sort of lead foot fake stepping. It's not as pretty when Usman does it, but he is doing it all the time, and it worked really well. And especially when he showed the grabs for the lead leg, didn't really commit to them much, but just doing it makes it so much trickier, especially with the body jab and the jab. But then it's kind of like Frankie Edgar with his body jab, shoulder jab, and then sometimes he dips and jabs the shoulder with his hand open and picks up the lead leg. That post single, but it's like that with the high crotch instead. So Usman was doing lots of feinting coming in. He managed to. Well, let's talk about the knockout, because the knockout was, a lot of the time people put together clips of someone getting knocked out and then them getting knocked out like 10 years before, and you go, yeah, okay, they got knocked out twice, But there was actually real similarity between this one and that one, and I think it was Rodrigo Dam, but it was a slapping left hook on the outside of Masvidal's right hand, and he jabbed as the opponent, or swung at the opponent as they stepped in. And that's something that he does a lot, because he scores the jab so often when people step in. He pulls his head back and jabs. And what happened was both men stripped away his right hand and leaned into where his right hand was, and threw their own right hand across the top of his left. So they're almost identical knockouts. He's swinging his left hand out with his right hand down by his waist because it's been pulled down. And Usman went for the move a couple of times. In fact, there's a bit early on in the first round where he pulls his lead leg away from a low kick, and he immediately goes, oh, better get in on that, and goes in with the slappy left hook to leaning right hand, and catches Masvidal with his feet underneath him, but didn't quite catch him, on the chin flush like he did with the knockout blow. And there was also a bit of similarity to the fatal Brett Rogers knockout, where you go through and they're unconscious and you hit them with your shoulder afterwards because you've thrown yourself so fully into it. But I thought this was a marvellous performance from Usman. There were bits where he got a bit sloppy, which the commentary team called out. It was like he'd throw the right hand and shift through on the left and stuff. And he's just doing stuff that you were like, why are you doing that? That's not something that you do very well. You are already really good at jabbing from both stances and just keeping it clean and tight. Why not just do that? And I want to give credit where it's due to Masvidal as well. I thought he looked fantastic getting up from the bottom of this one. That's always been the problem with fighting Usman. And I did say, unless they've invented a new way to break away along the fence, but he did. He was fantastic along the fence. He got taken down into closed guard away from the fence, and he opened his guard and turned onto his elbow, and he was using his top arm to swing elbows back through and turn Usman's head, and I really liked that. But it basically meant that Usman pushed into him, and they both got to the fence, and then he started to stand up, got his knee in between them, and stood up like Tyron Woodley did against Gilbert Burns. And then while Usman was trying to drop him back down to the floor, he caught his hand and whipped it over his head like you would for a back escape. Or, in wrestling, they do it too. You whip the hand over the head, and then the guy has to, circle around in front of you to prevent you from just popping out. But I thought it was really sharp. So he clearly had been doing all that work with wrestlers that we talked about. It's just that Usman was, outstruck him for the most part. The Namajunas one on against Zhang. What's her last name? Whaley's her last name. But Rose versus Zhang. This was really intriguing because, as I said, go read the article. But in the article, it was mainly a focus on an abstract concept in MMA or boxing or striking generally, which is long rhythm versus short rhythm. It's not a very fleshed out concept, and we talked about it more. but with Rose Namajunas as the sort of lens to look through. And then there were a couple of paragraphs at the end where I talked about this fight specifically, and I said I think she should stick to the long rhythm outside stuff and try and draw Zhang into an outside kickboxing contest, because if you remember Zhang's run through the UFC before she fought Andrade, she didn't look that impressive. There was one lash she took down and strangled. She always looked strong in the clinch. But when she fought Danielle Taylor and Tisha Torres, they fought her on the outside, and she just resorted to like inside low kicks and the odd side kick off a missed inside low kick. But she could have lost those fights on decision. They weren't very impressive. And I thought, get her into that sort of thing, get her missing inside low kicks by using the in and out of the lead foot. And that's what she did here, but I thought Zhang Weili, whatever, was timing the inside low kick very well. I don't think she missed one in the brief moments of this fight. That was my thinking. Work the in and out stuff, because that's where Rose really catches people. Don't fuck around too much on the inside, because that's where Rose tends to make mistakes. Like in the second Jacek fight, she got caught a lot there. In the second Andrade fight, she got caught a lot there. And she tends to get greedier as the fights go on and hang around in the pocket. And she also tends to like lose a lot of that. It's hard work doing the bouncing in and out stuff. It's a lot of work for a limited payoff, unless you catch them really clean. Whereas if you stay in range, you can keep throwing for much less effort. So it's hard to do. I mean, this is why we're always amazed by Cyril Gane, because he's 250 pounds and he still manages to be up on the balls of his feet for most of the fight. But yeah, the high kick, I think she might have, I was watching it a couple of times, but I think she might have been trying to catch the high kick on the open side as Zhang stepped up into the low line, into the inside low kick, which would be clever. I don't think she was like selling out to get the finish. I think she was just very surprised when it landed. But it caught Zhang right across the chin, and her hand was up. It just happened to glide inside the hand and catch her across the chin. It's fighting. These things happen. Some people said, did I think the stoppage was early? No. Was it as late as the Usman Masvidal one? No. That was bad. Yes, I think this is one of those fights where afterwards a lot of people were like, damn, stuff that Jack said in his article. And I was like, well, thanks. But I also, I don't think we saw a lot about what this matchup is. It happened so quickly. It was really just getting caught off guard by, I mean, Rose doesn't even throw that many high kicks generally. It's not something I've ever picked up on as like one of her big habits. I think she just caught her. And honestly, those are as we always say, those are the great ones. If you catch them early, people are like, well, why would I even want to see the rematch, even though Zhang had been a pretty impressive champion up to this point? Or certainly in the two fights, her winning the title and then her fighting Joanna. Just sort of caps off a rough 2 years for Zhang, because she couldn't get out of Vegas and then she couldn't get back into Vegas. It was very strange. She was having real trouble booking herself into a fight. And it got even more complicated because this was Jacksonville. They were doing, masks off, everyone just packing together. And lots of the Chinese coaches couldn't get visas. So you had Song Yadong in someone's corner randomly. Dean Thomas's nephew, I think, took over someone's corner. Because they had 4 Chinese fighters on this card. Or it might be 5. They had a Mongolian as well. But they had 5... Greater China. Oh, I'm going to offend someone by that, but you know what I mean. They had 5 Chinese fighters on this card, and I don't know if any of them got their own coaches. So yeah, a bit of a pain in the ass, but cool of Song Yadong if he stepped in, because I mean he's in. He's in Cali, isn't he? He's with the Team Alpha Male. On the subject of weird finishes, I suppose we better talk about Uriah Hall versus Chris Weidman. I've seen a couple of people ascribe to me the view that you can't check calf kicks. I don't think I've ever said that. I think I said, well, this is the thing about getting slightly internet famous. People will say, yeah, Jack Slack says this. And then people will go, does he? What a bastard. Without ever being like, where did he say that? I think whenever we talk about calf kicks, I'm always keen to elaborate on the ways you can deal with calf kicks and why they're more difficult to deal with generally in MMA. It's not that you can't check a calf kick. It's that a calf kick comes in low, below your knee, where a traditional low kick comes in above the knee. So if you pick your leg up, you're raising the top portion of your shin into the path of a thigh kick. But if you pick your leg up against a calf kick, you're just putting the kick further down on the leg, Which is why when you watch like Jeremy Stevens versus Gilbert Melendez, or actually Gilbert Melendez versus Jeremy Stevens, Gilbert Melendez versus Arnold Allen, he's getting up on one leg doing a full like turn the leg out, stand on one leg like a flamingo check, and it's just clacking through his ankle. It just looks like agony. But the one that the other people try to do is to step out into it, which is, has always been a thing for traditional thigh kicks because they'll ride up your thigh into your hip pocket. But with a calf kick, if you can step out into it, you can get them to hit the front of the shin. You don't want to raise your leg at all or raise your knee at all. You just want to step out into it. The trouble with that, and I feel like we stress this every time, is that a lot of people do that or try to do that and get knocked off balance anyway. So I've always said that probably the best way to deal with calf kicks is to retract the lead leg, just take it away. But in this one, you saw Hall step out into it, and even in the course of Weidman's shin breaking in half across his upper shin, Hall was getting knocked off balance. So it wasn't like, what a perfect check. It was just like he tried to lean out into the kick, and Weidman's leg snapped around his fucking shin. There is no rhyme or reason to this because it's an absolutely insane turn of events that Chris Weidman goes from breaking Anderson Silva's leg, and that was a check on a inside thigh kick, but breaking Anderson Silva's shin with something we very rarely see, to breaking his own shin. It's just, I couldn't believe, people were going absolutely bonkers in the crowd, and I'm glad they had the crowd there for this one, because I was staring at it like, what? And Hall seemed very bummed out about it. The best case scenario was that he was going to be knocking out a washed Weidman. He was pretty stoked when he knocked out a washed Anderson. But yeah, he was very cool about the whole thing and just being like, I'm really disappointed. And you got to feel for guys like that. You got to feel for anyone when they get their weird finish or whatever, because some people fight because they're good at it and they want money. A lot of people find out they're good at fighting because they like fighting. And if you train 8-12 weeks just monastically and you don't get really any payoff, that's got to be devastating. The one I always remember is the Renato Moicano getting angry after he choked the guy and tried to continue fighting. And he's like, I'm sorry, I wanted to fight more. And the guy goes, you shouldn't have submitted me then. But yes, what a bonkers career Chris Weidman's had generally. Because him and Luke Rockhold, there's no arguing that they weren't really, really good. There are people who are like, well, Weidman just got a load of old men or whatever. But Rockhold and Weidman, when they were at their best, it was like, who's going to beat this guy? He's really fucking good. Technically all round. He's a threat in every area. And then their bodies just gave out on them. Weidman looks slow as molasses now and just cannot take the beatings. And Rockhold, like, his chin just gave out. Absolutely crazy. Well, what's crazy is how fast it happened. Because, like, even at the end, Rich Franklin and Anderson Silva and all those guys, they're getting knocked out. But it was the usual path of a career into that depressing, why won't they hang it up? Chris Weidman has been shot since he lost the title, basically. And the same is true of Rockhold. Thank God Bobby Knuckles didn't follow suit. That would have been the most depressing thing in the world. It'd be like the curse of winning the UFC middleweight title. Actually, on the subject of bonkers leg injuries, Anthony Smith versus Jimmy Crute. We will talk about Valentina versus Jessica Andrade in a bit, but this one just another really strange stoppage. Happened in a reasonably normal way. He just got kicked with a really hard low kick, but managed to fumble through the rest of the round because he took the kick at about 1 minute 30 left, and he fumbled through, got a takedown. Smith got up and he managed to drive through and complete another takedown on his stanky leg. And you're like, damn, that's impressive. Looking forward to. I hope he can get that back under him by round 2. It was exactly like the Henry Cejudo Demetrius Johnson thing, or Michael Chandler versus Brent Primus. But yeah, no, it lasted the entire time. He fell down on his stool. He went to get up off the stool and fell down. The moment that they said the fight's over, he punched the fence and fell over. It was just like, you could see he was willing to fight, and good fair fucks to him because he comes out for the interview. He's like, I was just going to pull guard if they let me compete. But that's what they're, something you always have to aim for in serious competitive fighting is how can I make this person's body quit? Because a lot of the time the dude isn't gonna. In boxing, it's always, you're not going to finish him by hitting him in the head, go to the body. Because if you hit anyone in the body enough, like the hardest fighter in the world, you can take the wind out of them and they will go fetal. It's nothing to do with toughness. It's just if you catch them breathing in or if you hit the liver just right. And the same is true in like competitive jiu-jitsu. Ryan Hall's talked about it, but loads of dudes have talked about it. The reason they use the inside heel hook is because you actually put the guy in immediate danger of not being able to walk for a couple of months. It's really, I will destroy your body if you don't tap to this. And, if you don't tap to this, you do destroy their body so that they can't continue fighting. It's really interesting because like at the lower levels, if you're a hobbyist or a weekend warrior, guys will make you choke them all the way out, but they will tap to an armbar because they don't want to lose their fucking arm for like the next however many weeks. But it reverses once the competition gets serious enough to where guys will let you break or dislocate their arm, so you have to choke them unconscious. Like Jacare, his famous win over Roger Gracie, he gets his arm dislocated in an armbar and he just sort of runs down the clock afterwards because he's up on points. I'll tell you what did disappoint me, though. Alex Oliveira barely cheated in his fight. The only thing that seemed to piss off the crowd, and I couldn't hear what they were chanting, but when he called the groin shot, and it was sort of like a glancing groin shot. But yeah, got beat up by Randy Brown, who is enormous, like gangly-ass dude at welterweight, because Alex Oliveira is a gangly-ass dude at welterweight. And got hit with a good one too, gave up his back, got choked with one hand. A little embarrassing. No, it's not really. I mean, just another bonkers finish on a completely bonkers card. Some of these ones from the undercard were interesting. You got Na Liang. Is Na her first name? I'm going to call her Liang because they had that up on the screen. Versus Ariana Canalozzi, who has, Miranda Maverick had guns, but this lass is delts. We were talking about Weili Zhang's delts, but the delts on this lass. Gleison Tebow-esque, which leads me to believe that she could probably beat Habib. But Na Liang, I was not confident from the moment that she did her lap of the cage, and it was very Betch Correia-esque, I would describe her movement as. But immediately drops Canalozzi, and then Canalozzi comes up swinging, and Liang goes for the panic takedown. Back and forth on the mat, both attempting arm bars and then getting passed off the arm bars because the arm bar very rarely works in high-level MMA anymore. Na Liang came up on the high crotch from the floor, and Canalozzi, we talk about the butt drag a lot, but she used this lass like a bowling ball. She just reached around, hand fully into the crotch, 4 in the pink, 1 in the stink, and she just tears her forward onto her head. And then they both gassed out, and the finish was pity pat, sort of please stop the fight. But they had an entertaining little scrap while it lasted. Not quite Hagler Hearns-esque, as Daniel Cormier described it. He was pretty insufferable. I was having trouble. I've turned the commentary back on, but I was regretting it for several points in this one. And then he almost got into a punch-up with Jake Paul. And I jokingly tweeted that Jake Paul tried to get the fighters paid more and DC lunged at him because DC is just company man through and through. Now, he thinks they're going to let him be Dana at some point. Dude just hates the idea of the fighters unionizing, or just working collectively for any kind of improvement in circumstances. But immediately after I memed that, I memed it into existence, as I often do. People sending me links of Jake Paul then going on a tirade at Dana White about how Dana White doesn't pay his champion. Well, it doesn't pay his fighters, but even his champions don't get a fair cut of the pay. Which is 100% correct, and I think that's hilarious that Jake Paul is schooling fighters on it. But their reaction is probably going to be to close ranks around Dana and be like, he pays us very well, thank you. Well, I say that. Smiling Sam came out. Sam Alvey, the scourge of international Marxism, came out, and he's in the comments on MMA Fighting being like, actually, we're paid very well, and I love it here. Sam, is this because you're on a 5-fight losing streak? Because when you came into the UFC, you weren't getting enough money, so you spray-tanned a sponsor on your chest and got fined for it. As much as we joke about Sam Alvey's ridiculous takes, they are fucking dreadful, and they're an example of why fighters will always be treated like shit. always, forever. Because if you don't want to fight, there is always someone like Sam Alvey who, on a 6-fight losing streak, will turn up on the main card and be like, I always give it my best. I'd take 3 fights on one card and get knocked out 3 times if the commission would let me. If you're good at something, don't do it for free. I mean, the fucking Heath Ledger's Joker said that. And more importantly, why was Megan O'Leary wearing the Jack Nicholson Joker suit? What was that about? They normally dress her magnificently. Maybe it was to make sure that Rose really was the best groomed fighter on this card. Mind you, all the people going off on... Ariel tweeted like, oh, this is love here, with a picture of Pat Barry shouting into the face of a crying Rose Namajunas. And loads of people going off in the comments about like, you're normalizing grooming, blah, blah, but no word of the fact that Valentina is in this weird triangular relationship with her coach who is like 30 years older than her sister and then married her after teaching them as kids. What else was going on? Jeff Molina versus Ori Shileng. He's got his name listed as Shileng Ori, but then they had it as Ori Shileng the whole thing on the broadcast. I have so much to learn about Chinese and Mongolian culture, but we're going to call him Ori Shileng because that's what they had on the broadcast. This was back in the day when there was all that beef about Nick Diaz versus Carlos Condit. I said the line, pushing the pace when you're getting outlanded is just controlling the pace at which you get your ass kicked. That has never applied more than here, because Ori Shileng went forward the entire fight, barely landing and getting hit constantly. Very strange fight. They gave it fight of the night, but the fight of the night, performance of the night bonuses are bizarre, because performance of the night you should probably give to like a dominating performance, whether it ends in a knockout or not. But they just renamed the knockout of the night bonus because it was a bad look. They were like, oh, can't be seen to be encouraging brain trauma, even though we do. Mind you, they encouraged people to fight at the weigh-ins, and then Jeremy Stevens managed to hurt Drakkar Klose because they're all dehydrated, so when he pushes him, he gets whiplash and a concussion. And then as soon as that happens, the UFC's like, wash their hands of it. Wasn't on us. It's not like we use footage of DC and Jones fighting at the presses to market fights, or Conor throwing a trolley at a bus. Honestly, they don't pay Drakkar Klose his show money, at least. Dude should be pressing for charges against Jeremy Stevens for assault, because honestly, the UFC encourages people to do that silly bollocks, and then they ghost them when someone gets hurt. Anyway, moving on. There was one stoppage on here that I thought was a little bit soon, and that was the Dana Balgerel versus Kevin Navidad. I thought he dropped him, and then he's hitting him, and Navidad's framing off his across the body and getting up onto one elbow and shrimping his hips out. And then when the guy comes back in with a punch, he switches to the other elbow and starts hipping out. So he was really clearly defending himself and working. I thought that was a bad stoppage. But it's Herb Dean. You're going to get one bad Herb Dean moment on every card. Oh, and then Herb Dean let Usman kill Masvidal. So two on each card. Let's do a couple of quick questions. To Jack Slack, in your podcast, you explained why Ben Askren had little chance in boxing Jake Paul. If you knew that, brackets, and of course you are an expert, close brackets, so did boxing expert trainers like Duke Rufus and Freddie Roach. But after training with both of them, Askren had said with a smile that he expected to win. This is with his knowing nothing about footwork, distance, head movement, or punching. Do you think that both world-class trainers gave Askren false confidence in exchange for a trainer's fee, or was Askren in denial? Thanks, Joe B. Brackets San Francisco Bay Area. It might be Joe B. I think Heavy Hands got on this last week, but Freddie Roach will just say what. Freddie Roach is like Kurt Vonnegut. Kurt Vonnegut, fantastic writer, but they used to say that there was never a book he wouldn't give a blurb quote to. If you asked him nicely, he would just endorse your absolutely shit book. He'd be like, "Oh, it's a really lovely jaunt through literature or whatever." Just too nice a guy. I think there's a bit of that with Freddie Roach. Everyone he ever coaches, he's like, "I'm very surprised how sharp their hands are." Duke Rufus, who knows? He had Askren sparring with people that whole time when Askren was in MMA. He got Askren to a point where Askren could wrestle against very good strikers. There was a load of beef a while ago when that dude got killed on a Rufus Sports show, and then Pat and Rose were like, "Duke Rufus Sports is a terrible place," blah blah blah. But who knows with Duke Rufus? But he was probably just rooting for his boy. It's like there was that altercation backstage. Well, it wasn't an altercation. Woodley was sent to watch Paul get his hands wrapped because he sent a representative to watch the other team wrap the hands. That's where Jake Shields turns up and goes, "There was something shady about his hand wraps." And you're like, "Why didn't you say it to the commissioner while they were wrapping his hands?" Like, just preparing your bullshit excuse for why Nick Diaz lost. Like literally, you can stand there and say, "Commissioner, I don't think those hands are wrapped properly." Never mind. Anyway, Woodley and Jake Paul get into an argument, and Jake Paul's like, "Why don't you bet money on him then?" Tyron Woodley just has to keep going, No, my boy's going to kick your ass. Like, that's how good a friend Tyron Woodley is. He knows that Askren's about to get his ass kicked. He's not going to put any money on it. You've just got to support your boy. But then Brendan Schaub came out afterwards after being like, Askren is an amazing competitor, blah, blah, blah. He's an Olympian, blah, blah, blah. And then afterwards was like, well, we just had to root for Ben. We all knew he was going to lose. And you're like, you didn't present, you didn't seem like you knew he was going to lose. Anyway, cheers, Joey B. Say hi to Megan for me. Hey, Jack, on the last episode of the podcast, you talked about the Rose article. Bracket's really excited for that, by the way, so this came in before the article came out. You compared fighters' footwork outside of exchanges to an idle animation in video gaming. That seems really important to me and is honestly one of the most underappreciated aspects of striking. I'm not sure how much of what an elite striker, of what elite fighters do is conscious versus instinctual, but I've come to realize that this default footwork is a fundamental aspect for nearly every movement-based striker in MMA, whether they be Rose, Dom Cruz, TJ, or Sandhagen. After watching back my latest sparring footage, I also noticed that too often I default to standing completely still in front of my opponent and doing nothing for seconds at a time. At this point, I can perform a lot of the individual footwork patterns that these guys do in open space, but it doesn't come out automatically, and building offense out of it is an entirely conscious effort. In addition to copious amounts of repetitions, drilling these movements and chains of these movements together, what else can I do to improve my idle animations? Cheers and proactive leg kick defense bless. Yes, returning to this article, but plugging it again, but we were talking about like idle animations as in if you go into a fighting game, they're always jiggling around on the spot. The most famous one, and I used it in that article, is like Eddie Gordo doing the Jinga, which is a real life idle animation, basically. The Jinga is capoeira, where you're moving from one foot to the other, one stance to the other, very large movement, very rhythmic, often accompanied by musical instruments. So capoeira really is the dance fight game. It's all done to rhythm. When you take one stance, you lock yourself out of techniques on the other side, and there's it's really like the most extreme example of long rhythm. But almost every good fighter you ever see will never be standing still. And that doesn't mean like they'll be dancing around constantly like Dominic Cruz. That's like a really extreme example. But they will be moving either their head or shoulders, normally rocking from foot to foot. And that'll be even in like a back and forward bouncing pattern, or from foot to foot moving their head. And that is because, one, it makes you harder to hit when you're not thinking about it. And if you don't react to things in time, and it also makes it easier to hide your offense. If you're coming from a moving start, it's a lot easier to catch someone, and that's number one sort of flaw in most people taking up striking arts. But also, the number one sign that someone's really getting tired is when they stop between engagements. And I think that's really what, like, there are so many ways that tiredness kills you. You lose all your discipline, stuff like that. But I think the number one way that it kills you is probably that you stop wasting movement, or quote unquote wasting movement. And if it's not important, you don't do it. So you just stand there and then you lunge with a big like sellout punch. And this is just like everyone should be training to move for the full 15 minutes or however many rounds they're doing, and moving all the time. One of the like really easy ways to get moving lots is just like lead foot in and out a little bit. Even like Marvin Hagler used to do that a lot. Just bounce onto the back foot by bringing the lead foot in, and then bounce back into stance. But there's the Muay Thai sort of like up on the balls of the feet from foot to foot sort of stuff. Honestly, like if really big movement is a struggle for you, you can always do like the milling of the hands thing, where you're circling your hands. Junior Dos Santos used to do it. Nate Diaz does it from time to time, where you just circle your hands in front of each other, and at least you're creating a little bit of movement in your stance. And then you can throw your jab somewhere in the circle and speed it up. It's like a really extreme example would be Roy Jones when he straightened his right hand and like swung it around slowly. And then at any point in the circle, he might fire it through in a straight, like in a right straight. In Japanese martial arts, it's called enshin, the pinwheel. You just like move your hands around to hide what you're doing. But yeah, start with your hands and then start moving your weight from foot to foot and just start doing your shadow boxing out of that. I mean, that's something that I'm still working on, moving in all my shadow boxing. But I think the thing is, like, you get into the habit of training stuff and you're supposed to be like, well, 10,000 repetitions, I'll master that. But if it's not 10,000 repetitions exactly as it'll come out when you're sparring, if you're not moving like you should be when you're sparring, it's not really the 10,000 repetitions. Anyway, cheers, Max. Right, I think we touched on just about everything. I'm going to head out of here until Wednesday. I'm not sure what I'm going to do this week, Patreon-wise, but if you want to sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast, we're on a storming run of articles at the moment. It's Rose Namajunas' Long and Short Rhythm. Before that, it was Adriano Moraes and his little run in one and how he beat DJ and how it linked him with all the other victories he's picked up there. And before that, it was Sean O'Malley and the Cross Step. And before that, it was Marvelous Marvin Hagler, the Tower of Hagler. So we're on a storming little run, and I highly recommend you check that out. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Picking up the 8th most interesting knockout on the card. Bless.